So this week, the assignment was to paint a cloudscape from imagination. I've given this little demo. Ooh, I should have pulled it up in advance. I did a little demo for you guys about painting clouds. And the main thrust of it is that you can kind of fake your way into making stuff look 3D by making lumps on top of lumps. So we've got our simple lumps here, and it's gradients on gradients. Wait, we can't see the screen. Of course you can't, because I'm not sharing my screen yet. So lumps on lumps, right? Gradients on gradients. I was saying everything is actually gradients. The big lumps are one big gradient, and then we're just breaking them down into smaller little gradients like this. You can see that even though it still goes light to dark across the whole length of it, there's these little smaller areas that also go light to dark. And when you kind of layer them one on top of the other, you end up with this effect where the whole thing looks very 3D without actually having to think like 3D objects and holding it all in your mind and trying to calculate the lighting trajectories and the normals of all the directions of everything. You're able to just sort of like cheat your way through it. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this, because the assignment for next week is going to involve actually trying to hold all that stuff in your brain. I've got a challenge that it came up as part of a conversation I was having with a mentee today. And so now, due to recency bias, I'm going to foist it on you guys for next week's homework. We'll get to that a little bit later in the class. But first, this was, so I just made all these lumps and then I broke them down into even tinier lumps. And now I've got this beautiful, relaxing, puffy cloud. And I can do this all day. I mean, this is really the sort of thing, I think most of what I'm doing as a painter breaks down into some form of this. To me, this is what painting is just sort of putting lumps on lumps and creating gradients inside of gradients. And so I wanted to try to bring that idea to you guys to see if any of you liked it, if it worked for you. And the feedback that I got from the chat was that some of you were having a great time. And I could see that some of you who have very little prior experience, because I've gotten to know you a little bit through this class, did an amazing job on this assignment, which makes me super happy. I've got some already prepped in Photoshop here. So we're going to start the class off by me going through feedback that I've already pulled from the Discord channel, rather than me hopping back between the two. And then if you're here, feel free to raise your hand. I can pull you on stage while we're talking about your work. Or if I haven't pulled yours into Photoshop, after I'm done with these, if you want to raise your hand, we can go take a look at your homework together. And I'm happy to give a little bit of feedback on it. So if you don't see yours up here over the course of this, feel free to raise your hand if you want me to talk to you a little bit. I'm available. And then we're going to get into a little brief demo that relates to next week's homework before the end of the hour. Sound good? All right. First one up, H. Eagle or Hegel. I always think of you as Hegel. I hope, please let me know if there's a pronunciation that you prefer. I know that you're not super experienced with digital painting, but you did an awesome job on this. You can see right away this sense of sort of three-dimensionality across the clouds. This was so encouraging to me to know that you had a good experience with this. You said, I really enjoyed it. And I mean, that's what we're here for. And I noticed you doing a lot of really good things that I wanted to point out. The way that you pulled these darker shapes way up in the middle here creates this crack in the clouds. H. Eagle, it's part of my name. Okay. Yeah, you don't need to chat. It's fine. So by pulling these darker areas up further into the sort of structure of the cloud, you're able to make these nice, thick, fluffy looking lumps. And that's what we want to see. It's sometimes, I noticed that some of you struggled a little bit with pulling some darker colors up into the lighter areas. Because the whole cloud's white, it feels like, hey, I don't want to take these really, really dark colors and use them as part of something that's supposed to be white. But that's the game we're playing. We have to go by what looks right. Um, I think if you wanted to keep going with this, you totally could find shapes to the clouds that you are as appealing as that are more appealing to you. Just continue to push things around. This is the sort of thing that you can just do over and over and over again. And then I say you could probably even chunk down these bits even smaller. So you've got this textured brush. I'm going to talk more about that in some other feedback here. The textured brush is not my favorite. I think if you wanted to get these smaller lumps, feel free to just go use like a more clearly defined brush, just like a round brush or something, and you can break these down even smaller. You can come in and break down even smaller and smaller bits, the same way you did with these, and just come in and break them into tinier and tinier pieces. And there's really no limit to how much you kind of fractalize this. I don't know if that's a word. Fractalize this whole thing. Okay, so great job. Super encouraging to see your progress. I love it. Jelly Bear. There's some things I want to point out I really love first. Number one, Jelly Bear says, I spent a lot of time overthinking this, but I tried my best to just focus on having fun. And that is really what's important. The goal here is to try to make sure that this experience is a nice time. Art's fun. There's a few things, though, that kind of stand out to me. Number one is the repetition of the pattern. When we're doing these kind of lumps on lumps, if we're doing them in a way where they create a kind of repeated pattern like this, it calls out to our brain. It calls attention to us in a way that, like, you know, some surrealist artist would do on purpose. But I think if we're going for something that feels natural, the thing that's most natural in a lot of situations is chaos. And so what we need to do is spot areas where we are creating a pattern, an easily noticeable repeating pattern, and we need to intentionally bust it up to make it look like it was all an accident. So the paradox of this thing, and there are always paradoxes in art, is that you need to behave in a way that is intentional, in a way that makes it look accidental. So there are different ways in which we can break this up to make it feel a little bit more random. One of them is that we can take the lumps and we can kind of offset them. So there's one over here, and then there's one over here. So we're like, you know, going back and forth like this. We can also, that's sort of like the frequency modulation, right? We're doing a zigzag like this. We can also kind of modulate the amplitude, talking about, you know, the way wavelengths work. So we have one that's like close. These two are kind of close together. And then the third one's further apart. So we can kind of zigzag directions back and forth, and we can also change the frequency. So we're like, I don't know if frequency or amplitude. It's kind of like amplitude is what, where the waves get squishy, while frequency is how high and short and long the waves are. So yeah, you know, we can try to find patterns and break the pattern. We can change the patterns along how high up they are or how low down they are from side to side. We can also, the other thing I was thinking about is the color. And this is going to, I think, come up in a few different people's feedback. I was doing just white on blue to create my gradients here. But if you're going to use multiple colors, you actually have the ability to kind of play with them and use them as well. So you can have this whole cloud just go from blue to purple. And that's going to look really, really nice. Because you've already established a sort of blue and purple color palette, you have like the means here to be able to create a gradient that goes between them. I'm making the purple a little darker to exaggerate it here. And from there, we can then start to make lumps on lumps using these colors. You've opened yourself up to having a really fun time with the colors. And so I think you can push it even further using those colors and making it just this nice, like, candy colored cloud adventure. Just have fun with it, like you were saying. Have fun with every aspect of it. Niantra. This is one of those cases that I was talking about. Niantra didn't have a comment here, but I know you're here in the audience. Where this is where you can potentially run into some problems if you are looking to like the color of what the thing is supposed to be a little bit too closely. So in order to get the feeling that the clouds are really three-dimensional, we need to see a change over distance. There needs to be a change over a distance. This is what the whole gradients thing is about, painting by thinking about everything as a gradient. So we could have the change go, this way, or we could have it go this way, straight up and down, just right all the way across. If we wanted to show that off, taking the large cloud shape that you've made here and just adding a dark part so that we have a change over a distance here. You can see how now it's gone from being relatively flat to now we've got this nice big lump here. And we can do the same again, this cloud. So I'm just trying to sort of define where the darkest point is first to make a cut. And then from there, I'm turning my opacity down a little bit and I'm smushing that color upwards, just using the brush tool. And this way, I'm able to create a nice gradient that runs across the whole thing. And that gradient going from white to blue gives the sense of, it can mean a lot of different things inside of a painting. It could be a flat object that's being lit by a light that's falling off. It could be that this thing is painted with a gradient on top of it, or it could be rounded. Like a gradient doesn't just mean that things are rounded. It means a lot of different things based off of the context of what we're looking at. But because we get the sense that this is a cloud, and because the lighting direction is pretty consistent across this, our brains pick up and interpret these gradients we're seeing as the form of the cloud turning over space. So the gradients on a painting can depict a lot of different things. I think when it comes down to just the basics here, you can see that building in a very simple gradient, especially if you put a gradient inside of a gradient, will give you a nice three-dimensional look. You just need to push things a little bit darker. Miguel Firewolf. I know you are also somebody who is just learning, and you also did an incredible job on this. I just wanted to pull this up and say congratulations. This is a really great start. I think this is a really good example of the lesson that we were trying to do today. And I just wanted to give a little bit of a pointer to get it further along. You can see how we get this nice stair stepping that first we're down here at this dark color, and then the shadow color is more like mild, and then the shadow color is downright bright by comparison. Same thing with the highlights. At first the highlights are decently dark, and then they get brighter, and then they get brighter again. And as we move across this big form, we get this big gradient in here. It sort of redefines where is our peak highlight and where is our deepest shadow. And the highlight from one can actually look like the shadow of another. But the context of all of them layered on top of each other gives us this beautiful three-dimensional look. I would say, and this is something I think I'm going to be repeating. I would say this is something I think I'm going to repeat. I think I pulled a couple examples of this. But I really think that you should, I saw a lot of people going for clouds using a soft or cloudy brush. I have a cloudy brush in my brush set. This is what my cloud brush looks like. I don't ever use it for clouds because it's rare that I see a cloud that has consistent soft borders like this. I feel like, I don't know, clouds come in any shape. Sometimes you really want to make hard edges along them, and sometimes you want to make soft edges. It's even though I have it labeled as my cloudy brush, I use this for like if there's going to be a thin film of mist. I use it very irregularly. Typically, when I'm painting something like a cloud, I usually just stick to the round brush because this allows us to have areas that are firmer and harder, firmer or softer, to be able to make like nice flowing soft edges and little crumbly bits, while other bits like end up a little bit firmer. And that regulation between doing the firm bits and the soft bits, having that vary as you go across the edges is going to add interest, and it's going to add that chaotic feeling that makes it feel even more natural. This is true of the exterior, but it's also true in the interior. Excuse me. These lumps that you have on the inside, very nicely arranged. These lumps here, looking very good. If you wanted to make this look even more natural, definitely keep the separations between the lumps, but I would get them broken down into smaller shapes. See, I'm taking this one big shape here, and I want to break it down into like a more small chaotic pattern like this. So we can just sample from the colors nearby and start to smush those around. And you can see that we're getting a little, and then you see as it starts to like break apart into smaller pieces, we get this like even more natural shape. This more chaotic, more natural, more organic looking cloud shape. So again, taking that pattern that you've already started to establish so well and breaking it down one tier smaller. It's a lot tougher to do when you have a really highly textured brush. It's easier to do when you have something that is like really firm and in control like the round brush. Thanks so much. It's really great to see the progress that you've made. 13 Rioche. Oh, I'm glad it helped. Thank you. Hey, it's like brioche. Oh, brioche. 13 Rioche. This was an awesome example. I really loved this one. 13 is the B. Okay, so it's just brioche. I'm getting it now. I'm too old to read usernames. I've officially crossed the boundary where I'm too old to read usernames. I like how solid everything is. You're doing a much more stylized approach to the assignment, which is totally valid and I think looks really good. I especially like the way that even though you have this very firm edge on things, you've got this stylized kind of cartoony outline to it. You are also taking opportunities to smush it around and break it up, which is an excellent creative choice. I wanted to highlight this for a very specific reason, because you did the assignment of breaking things down into like these gradients inside gradients, these lumps inside lumps, very, very well. You have this warm color that's sort of washing across this, and it's most intense at the top, and then it's completely faded out towards the bottom, and that's exactly what we need. However, I noticed that I had this bad habit back in the day, and I saw this and I thought, maybe you are doing the same thing that I used to do, and I wanted to see if I wanted to highlight it in case it was useful for anybody in the audience. And the habit I used to have is that I used to do all the cracks and crevices first. So I would go in and do all of the cracks and highlights and all the defined shapes like this first, and then I would go through and I would try to mush, and so I'd make all the little gradients first, right? And then I would go and I would try to add the big gradient over the top of it. So I would have this color that I would be using and I would be putting it all over, and then I'd be blending it in. And then to make the whole thing look 3D, I would then try to add a bigger gradient sort of over the top of it. So I'd start with all the little tiny bits, and then I would try to do the big bits at the end. And this is doable. You did that too? Teal saying, oh, I did that. Yes. So starting with the little gradients and then making a big gradient over the top of it is what I was sensing from this. And it's something I don't remember where I like transitioned away from it. But I have discovered over the years that it is often far easier to get the big stuff in first and then subdivide it smaller. So yeah, it sounds like this is something that was pretty common. Guilty? Okay. I'm glad I'm calling it right. But yes, there's something about I feel like I can see the use of like a soft brush to try to wash over these pieces here to bring this back like this, to try to create that big gradient over the smaller ones. And there's something it does to the color or like the arrangement of the values, something. And to me, it just looks like a soft overlay on top of the smaller thing. And then if you want to get it really precise, then you're just going back in and fiddling with it again and again. In the demo that I did, I felt like, let me pull up my demo again. In the demo that I did, I was able to get a pretty organic overall distribution of color. I'm gesturing with my hands. You guys can't see. I've got a really organic distribution of color, and I'm not really going back and forth sampling a lot. And part of that comes from building in the biggest shapes first and then breaking them down smaller. It ends up being way easier. It's true when you're doing a figure. I started doing this in the middle of when I was doing all my figure studies. At first, I was trying to draw all the like cracks at the corners of the mouth and like tear ducts and get all of the little tiny bits arranged perfectly and then try to like fill out the volume of the head. When I moved back the other way and started doing like the volume of the head first and then carving smaller and smaller features into it, the way that like classical oil paintings often were often done, I discovered it was so much faster and it was so much easier to get that sense of volume and three-dimensionality to it. So I think you did an excellent job, but I wanted to point that out because it seems like a bunch of you were doing the same thing, starting with all the stuff that's catching your eye because it's high contrast, and then moving to the big gradient, which is actually not very eye-catching, but it's actually the most important thing because the biggest shapes are the thing that we recognize first as a viewer, as an audience member. Great. Brioche, thank you. All right. Fascia. This is great. I mean, it seems like you're somebody who's just getting started, but you really nailed the heart of this assignment. I think that the colors here are really good. The way you've created this larger gradient with the smaller lumps on it. Perfect, perfect, perfect. The one thing I do want to call out is I can tell you're using the smudge tool. And I know people who they live and die by the smudge tool. I hate it. I have maybe I have a little bit of a bias against it. Maybe I have a big bias against it. Trying to do blending using the smudge tool, really tough. Part of the reason is that you get these streaks and then you go against it, you get streaks inside of streaks, and it's really hard to get something that feels smooth and consistent. Smudging seems like the easiest way to make a hard edge soft. But the intuition that you have about that is wrong. I know some people who who this is like a key thing for them, is that they use the smudge tool, they get great use out of it. It is I believe it's an advanced tool. It's something that beginners should be wary of. And I know we have some beginners in this class, so I know most of you, you were all doing like a technique using the brush tool, but there's probably some beginners in here that are tempted by the dark side of using the smudge tool. So I want to show just a quick demo for those of you who are still very early in this, how to blend a little bit using just the brush tool. And I'm just going to call out a few things. I'm using a simple round brush. This is the brush pack that I have up on the website, huckleberry.art. My opacity set at 100%, but I do turn my flow down to about 10%. And I'm using the Alt key to sample a color here. In between, my light color and my dark one, there's usually a little band of messiness that's a kind of in-between color. So I reach for that with the Alt key, and when you tap it, color select that. And then when you make brush strokes that run along that gap like that, like you're smudging it, it starts to soften that up. This is with, again, this is with 100% opacity. If you turn the opacity down to about 30%, we're going to grab one of those in-between colors again. Then that intensity of that smudging effect will get even weaker. And you can see that we are going to be able to get a nice, even gradient. And as we like sample those messy in-between colors and we just sort of pet our way through it, and we're running, I'm gonna change the brush so you can see the direction I'm making the strokes here. I'm just doing this. And as we have a low opacity brush, just even a hard edge brush, this isn't a soft brush, hard edge brush, opacity down to about 30-40%, sample a nearby color, and you can get really smooth, really highly controlled blending without having to switch tools, without having to learn anything exotic in Photoshop. It's really, really easy. And then when you want to change the shape of something, you can turn the opacity back up. And then you want to make smaller bumps or something. You want to like blend something. You can see I don't even need to change tools. I'm able to do this all with the brush tool just by sampling a little bit and smudging it around. And it works kind of like acrylic, kind of like oils. But we can get these very appealing, very soft gradients that are totally in control, all off this one brush. So we can get super hard edges, super soft edges, and everything in between. And this gives us the ability to make things that like are any chaotic random shape that we want, so we can have fun drawing all kinds of little bumps and lumps all over the place. Thanks so much for letting me use you as an example, by the way. Moe, or Mo, I guess I'm reading it in the Japanese style, came in as a buzzer beater the last minute. I wanted to say great colors, great lumps. Really love, this is a good example of the kind of effect that we're looking for when you're just using simple brushes. I thought this was a great example of the kind of painterly texture that's possible. You say you struggled a lot with this one, but I think your struggles panned out because I'm seeing really good painterly texture. This is the kind of creamy painterly texture that gets me out of bed in the morning. I love this. And all I think you would need to do is just break it down further. If you just wanted to grab some of these colors and break this down a little more and chunk up some of these edges, I don't know how much time you spent on this. Feel free to write if you spent some time on this. Like, I'm kind of wondering what happens if you spend twice as much time on this, because you have an opportunity here to spend all day with these lumps. 1 hour, nice. I usually do about 2 hours on studies. And then when I get into painting, if I'm in to paint like a whole big old mess of clouds, I might spend many hours just on the clouds, just fricking around. Open yourself up to spending more time with it. And like, if you're getting these results already, I have a feeling that if you spend just a little bit more time with it and continue to play like you have been, I think you're going to get some really great results. Like, it doesn't take much for me to push stuff around on here for it to feel very natural. I think you're off to an awesome start. You don't have to spend 2 hours. No, I'm just saying I usually spend about 2 hours on mine. And I think like there's a expectation from a lot of people that like art, if you're doing it right, should happen really fast and really automatic. And the truth is that art tends to be something that like, people who are pros at art, it's not that they get really good at being fast. It's that they really love spending all day on it. And so if you've been up to it for an hour and you've been thinking, man, this is taking forever, Like, just understand that, like, the options available to you. You're not falling behind. You're not being slow. The options available to you to just keep going as long as you feel like. Art is something that is best experienced just by spending a ton of time with it. Didn't want to stress you spent 30 minutes? Yeah. I mean, if you want to like make it a quick bop and just get in and out in 30 minutes, you're welcome to. But I recommend spending more time, not because you get better results, but because then you get to spend more time painting. And that's kind of the whole point. Pros often spend like 40 to 80 hours on a piece. It's true. I know oil painters tend to take even longer. I was talking about a friend of mine who's an oil painter, and his typical is 100 to 200 hours of painting. If you really like painting, the idea of getting to spend 200 hours on a painting is a gift. Presuming that it's something you really want to make and you really like the feeling of pushing around with it, like that's always available to you. Oil painting takes forever. It does. And that's not a bug. That's a feature. So I think I had a big breakthrough in my art when I started spending more time on stuff, just giving myself an unlimited budget until I got everything I wanted to put into the painting. And that's what cracked open painting for me, of just realizing I had permission to just spend forever on it. All right. And last one, Talia. All right. Finian, I see you. Feel free to keep your hand up. I'm going to get to you in just a second. Oh, wow. This was fun. I struggled a bit with overworking them. Two things to say. Well, three things. Number one, great job. This was an excellent study. I absolutely love the colors. So I guess that was my first thing I want to talk about is the colors. The way that you're using all kinds of random colors in here, it still feels like white fluffy clouds. This is something that's true about light and about color, is that colors are really actually quite flexible. And so you can throw all kinds of crazy colors into a white cloud painting and have it still feel like white clouds. That's an option that's available to all of us at all times. And so I thought that you were demonstrating that in a really great way. But I did pull yours up also as an example of like, I would love to see what you would do without the cloud brush. I'm seeing these like individual marks here that are they kind of look like a stamp, maybe from either like a cloud that has light on the outside of it, or maybe it was like a pool of like watercolor paint that's like wet on the edge. I would love to see what you did if you skipped that and you used something that had slightly tighter control. And the reason is that when you're going and painting a ton of little things like this, you just get better feedback from your hand to your brain when you're making cleaner marks. A lot of crustier looking, these kind of textured brushes can be really good for creating patterns and textures like on a flat surface. And they can be good to kind of shorthand your way through certain chaotic marks. But if you are looking to upgrade your like basic painting skills, I think that working with simpler brushes is better, partially for the reasons I was saying before, where you get more control to say, I want to have some tight edges mixed in with the looser, more crumbly ones. But also, like, you get a more clear feedback on whether or not you are putting things in the right place. Because, like, as you're going through this whole painting process, there's moments where you're like, oh, I'm nailing it. And there's other moments where you're like, oh, I'm screwing it up. And that's your brain telling you, like giving you these reward and punishment signals that are helping you learn. It's the sensation of learning. And when we use like really loose brushes, it can sometimes dull the sensation of the feedback that we get from our brains. So I think that in order to get like the best, most complete experience with painting, we need to have a really clear sense that like the marks we're making are our own and not like being constructed automatically by a brush, by a textured brush. Textured brushes are a really powerful tool, but I think just like the smudge tool, I would just forego it as much as possible and use it as kind of like an expert shortcut once you've had a better sense on doing things the manual way. When you have a really strong sense of how to do it manually, then you have a much clearer sense on how you can do it using more automatic tools. That's my feeling. 100% between nailing and screwing it up. Yeah, it's funny. Like there's this feeling that you get when you're painting, and it's so clear. Where you're like, one moment you're like, yeah, I'm doing it, I'm getting it done. This is so good, and then the next moment you're like, oh, I think everything I've put on here is crap, and I'm gonna need to paint over every inch of it. And it's this like the agony and the ecstasy of painting, and that's just the feeling of learning. Like that's the learning feeling. And it's like, this is what we should be going for when we're doing studies. If we're feeling that way, like excited one second and then downtrodden the next, that's like means that these really great signals are like reaching us, and we're picking up on them, and we are growing as the result of the work we're doing. That should be the ideal. It's sometimes I think people try to avoid the feeling of like, I'm fucking it up. I need to do something more safe. I need to do it correct. And like I say, don't worry about it, especially for studies. What we really want is these wild emotional ups and downs. There are very few places in our life where wild emotional ups and downs are like what we're seeking. But like during a painting, that's kind of like, that means that we're in it. All right. I'm going to bring Finian up on stage. Anybody who wants to talk to me about their homework for this week, feel free to raise your hand and I can pull you up and talk to you. We've got a little bit of time here. Finian, hello.
Hello.
How you doing? How was your experience on the homework this week?
Oh, I'm doing fine. I am kind of trying to not fall asleep currently because it's late. Uh, I had much fun doing the homework. I went into a little bit of hyperfixation to the point that I finished it very fast, but I was very excited, and it was driving me to paint more and faster.
Oh, good. Oh, you were the first person. That's why I had to scroll up so far. I was wondering where you were.
Yeah, yes.
I'm telling you, that feeling of being driven to want to work, that like this is what happens when I'm painting something I really love like this, and I'm really happy that you had the same experience. Do you have any questions about the work? Do you have any questions for me?
Mm, I usually have the biggest problem with like kind of making my works look 3D,
Mm-hmm.
even though I try to use the bit gradients, it always kind of falls flat. But I don't know if it's only in my eyes or overall.
Hmm. I think you got most of the way there with this. Because I mean, we have this big gradient here. It reads very clearly. You've got these smaller chunks here. Um, but I think that there's maybe two things that are holding it back. Um, One of them is I think that I want to see more medium-sized chunks. I want to see some bits that are a bit more like a bit more middle-sized, because right now we have this like collection of lots of small pieces that are all very broken up, and that can be correct for clouds. But I get this sense that you're trying to create this big gradient across the whole length of it, and what I'd really like to see is like three levels of chunks, where you have the really really big form here, and then you've got these smaller, like you've got these medium sized forms, and then from there, then you start breaking it up into like the smallest little bits. But I think you need to make sure that you are maintaining those middle sized pieces as best as possible. When I was doing this on the demo, I actually did all three layers of it, the biggest shape, the medium shapes, and the small shapes on separate layers, because something that can happen when you are starting to break things apart and make them smaller is that you kind of lose perspective on how they fit into the larger bit. And if you have like if you just work on a separate layer, even if it's just a normal layer, it allows you to flip things on and off to see whether or not you're kind of accomplishing the goals you're setting out for. That's one of my recommendations. The other one, I think, has to do with the consistency of the direction on the gradients. Because we have just, like, you have two light sources here. You've got this nice warm rim light, but this main light source that's coming on top of it, we have this gradient that's going this direction, right? But in this case, like, you can see this shape is like swooping this way. And in this one, it's kind of going this direction, starting off with the brightest part over here. What I may not have mentioned in my tutorial is one of the things that helps it look really 3D is not just breaking it down into a hierarchy of like larger and smaller pieces, but making sure that all those pieces all run the same direction from each other. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I think I have problem with that in my other works, so this will be a good thing to look out for from now.
Good. One of the things that I've done as a trick in order to help with this is I will, somewhere in the scene on a new layer, I will go and grab my shadow color, and then I will go and render a sphere in the scene using the lighting that I intend to make. And that way I have a solid reference object that when I start to ask myself, okay, where is the highlight supposed to be on this thing? Instead of having to like keep it in the back of my mind, I have a visual reference nearby that I'm able to look at and use as a cheat inside the scene. And then when I don't want it anymore, I can just turn it on and off on the layer. So I would recommend doing that on your other paintings. If you're finding the consistency in the lighting direction is a challenge, make sure that you create just like a little study cheat for yourself there on the inside your PSD.
I think it would be very useful, especially that I tend to jump to colors very fast and to putting a lot of different little detail coloring. So I think a sphere like that would be very useful.
Great. I'm happy to hear it. Well, thanks for coming on stage. We got one more person to come through, and then I'm going to be giving the assignment for this week. Hi, it's
sorry.
a cat. Hello, welcome.
Hi. I pretty much had like two questions that are kind of related. Like one's related to the homework and the other's like an overall art question.
Sure.
And is it okay if I ask both now or?
Yeah, let's blast through them. I'm trying to keep this to an hour, so we got 12 minutes for me to answer the question and then also get on the assignment.
Okay, cool. I'll be very quick. So when I was working on this piece, the biggest like thing that I noticed is like, one is like I do a lot of like line art in my art, and for this one I tried to go and keep it a lot more painterly.
Yep.
But I still like wound up like at the end it kind of still had like this like element of like line artness to it.
Yes.
And I was like wondering like how I can like kind of like push that away through like more like rendering or like brush strokes.
I have this theory that just like I get this a lot when I'm doing mentorships with people, is that they will show me, hey, I'm really good at drawing with lines and I love drawing with lines and I usually draw everything in lines. How do I make stuff that doesn't have lines in it? And I always just push them to be like, just keep doing lines and don't worry about making everything super painterly. Like, I think it's fair to study it, but like holistically, like the big answer is don't sweat it. If your work tends to be fairly linear and you like using lines and you think in lines, keep going for it. Like, and just incorporate that into your stuff. Even if you're going to have like a painterly treatment on it, like even if you're going to do like painting studies, do painting exercises, like do whatever makes you happy. But like, I would shy away from trying to like, strategically eliminate how you add lines to stuff.
Okay.
It tends to be part of certain artists' artistic identity. And I just always want to encourage people to be using the strategies that are easiest for them and working in the ways that come most naturally. So don't don't sweat it. I think I was going to use this as a really good example of another point I wanted to make, which is that, hey, yeah, we're just drawing clouds this week, but and you're starting to add like a little bit of architecture into it. You know, the reason why this is an interesting exercise is because it illustrates this concept of, you know, drawing lumps on lumps to make stuff look 3D without having to use too much brain power. But this is applicable for basically anything. You know, as soon as you start trying to draw a bunch of like towers and city pieces and stuff, a lot of the same principles come into play. So like the same way that we can see a lot of different things in clouds, you know, this lesson in painting clouds is really intended to just be a proxy for being able to paint any kind of lumpy shapes you want to. And I thought it was cool that you were bringing in some additional stuff. You're kind of taking it further already just by adding some additional structure here. But so was this your overall art question about like how do you eliminate the lines, or was that specific to this assignment?
That was the assignment one. The other thing is that recently, like with my artwork, I've noticed that like I'm mostly a digital artist, but my clay work tends to be like a lot more expressive than my traditional art. And digital art, and I've been wondering how to like bring that in. And I can like send some like examples in like the side chat if that would help.
I can't go over it too much right now because I'm almost out of time. But I would say that working across multiple disciplines is always going to help. If you're going to be doing sculpting, you're going to become better at painting. Like the assignment for this week is going to be about trying to think in 3D as a 2D artist, and that's just like that's a big part of the game. Is like you're always sculpting, whether you're working in digital paint or you're working in clay. You're sculpting one way or the other. And the more you can sort of like build up that skill, just the skill of sculpting, whether it's in 2D or 3D, the better you get at both of them. Like when I've tried doing sculpting as someone who's done decades of painting, I've been able to make really fast progress with it compared to somebody who has no art experience, because painting skills actually translate into sculpting skills to some degree. I mean, there's a famous quote, I think, from Michelangelo that said that all painters are just failed sculptors. And like it really translates both directions. So I think that the more you keep exposing yourself to other disciplines and digging deep on them, the more you're just going to see it. You don't need to like figure out a strategy for getting them to link up and like synergize together. It'll just do it. And so the more mileage you get on sculpting, the better, more natural you're going to be with painting. It's just going to make more sense to you. Your brain's just going to get stronger at it.
Alrighty. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming on stage and asking questions. All right. So I am going to move on now. I've been seeing a lot of questions in the chat, but I don't have anyone to help me moderate today. So I haven't been able to see everything you guys are writing. I'm sorry about that. I have a little demo for you that I prepared right before class, and it's going to illustrate what the assignment for this week is going to be. I want you to make a low poly portrait. Oh God. Rip Dustin. I don't know. I didn't ask Dustin to be here, so if he's not here, it's fine. Like it wasn't expected to be. W topology. Yeah, this is for those of you who have some level of experience with 3D modeling. You know, it gives a little bit of language for what we're trying to do here. Topology is like what? The science of surfaces. And I was in a conversation I was having, I think last week on this class, I was talking about normals. A normal is like the direction that a polygon is facing in 3D space, right? Like coming out from the center of, I don't remember where the conversation was, but like coming out from the center of every polygon is a vector that is like pointing in a direction to show where it is pointing in 3D space. Like what's the direction of it generally? And so when I'm looking at a portrait like this and I'm trying to imagine it in 3D, I'm looking past these little specific creases that are creating highlights. And I'm looking past just the way that there's a gradient that moves from like lighter to darker across the cheek. What's actually happening in my mind, and this is something that blows the minds of non-artists, is I'm thinking about the 3D volumes of the figure. So I'm thinking about, and because I can't think about them organically, there's not enough room in my brain to think about them like this. I'm often considering things like, you have trouble with the nose? Well, you're probably not considering the side plane of the nose. What is the shape that runs along the side of the nose? Does the nose form a perfect point? Of course not. It tends to form kind of a flattened shape. Why did the nose is one of those things that's tough to draw because you want to draw like a triangle, but it's not a triangle. It's this complex arrangement of planes that some of them are kind of sneakily pointing downwards when you think they should be pointing up. And some of them kind of curl upwards, like this little bit over here underneath the nostril that tends to catch light, when you think it should be pointing down. And the process of learning how the face is shaped is not just looking at the contours on the outside of the features that form these like lines of contrast. It's about understanding the ways in which these planes are modeled in 3D. And there's a lot of really good, I found this James Gurney blog. I just Googled planes of the head, and there is so much literature on this. About, there's the Loomis method, and then there's people who study all sorts of different ways. And the goal is to create a shorthand that you can remember as you navigate around the face to figure out where are the corners, where are the creases, kind of like this. Yes, Godslayer 27 is a really good example. And having some mental shorthand for these planes, you don't need to remember all the corners in specific, but like as you get familiar with faces, you start to learn where these lumps and bumps are relative to each other, not like an anime drawing where it's just like, lines and circles and stuff and corner for a nose and like weirdly drawn mouth and stuff. Like, trust me, I came from anime. I know I've been stuck in that hole longer than you guys can even imagine. There is a 3-dimensional topology to everything. And the more that we can build a language of it for ourselves, the better we're going to get at painting something like the face or the human form. And the more you can learn to think in 3D, the better you're going to get at drawing everything. Because at the end of the day, as I was just saying to its cat, painting and sculpting are kind of the same thing. When we're doing the cloud exercise, this was a way of me showing you how to cheat, how to make something look 3D by only treating it as a series of kind of 2-dimensional gradients that make an illusion of depth. But if we wanted to use our whole brain and get deep into it, what we would be looking at, what we'd be thinking about is how is this actually shaped in 3D? So what I want you to do is I've got this example here, and then if you want to do a different one, you are welcome to do a different one. But I want you to do a portrait, like a bust portrait of a human. You could do an animal if you really love animals, but I would like you to try, because it's going to be super difficult, to make a low poly version of them. Doesn't need to be much more complex than this. I can show this off also. This was me doing it rough and tumble to try to like explain my thinking really quick. I think I spent about 30 minutes on this, and that was with me trying to figure out what I was even trying to say about it. So I think if you guys spend a little bit, we include refs. Yeah, sure. Include the refs so that there's a good comparison. You can do it like this, where it's the two pieces side by side. I would avoid tracing. I would see if you can figure out where all the features are, and then build it into like a 3D lattice like this. I've done it where each of the different polygons have mostly flat shading on them in an effort to try to really sell the idea of it being 3D. But you can do something that's a little bit more shaded if you want. The goal is not to really to light this. I'd say if you look at the James Gurney Head Planes blog, there's a bit of writing on it and some good examples of how these sorts of things can look. And you can see once you start to soften it up a little bit, these planes are all not strictly flat. Many of them in these examples are curved. So they will create a little bit of curvature to them. But it's mostly flat. And it's really there to help us think through this. Not the parts on the outside, not the silhouette, not the parts of high contrast, but to really think about this as a three-dimensional object. We also have our own set of resources. If you go to the Learning tab, there is a channel called Study Reference. That's where I pulled this image out of. When I've been doing studies, I've just been going to the Study Reference. So if that's it, no big final questions. Thank you so much, everybody, for showing up. This has been a blast to teach every week. I will see you back here next week. All right? Have a good one. Bye-bye.